September 9th, and at this very moment, the center of Moscow has been blown up. Nuclear bombers have been attacked. Hundreds of Flamingo missiles and drones have struck the Russian capital. At Engels, the airfield has been blown up, strategic aircraft and missile depots destroyed. Boom, bada boom. I got a call.
7 a.m. That's the kind of fire burning there?
That's the airfield. Damn! Thousands injured. The fires can't be put out. We'll show you exclusive footage and details right now. Hundreds of new Flamingo missiles have been launched at Russia. Bases and oil depots are burning, and this is just the beginning. And the cherry on top, they've blown up the Druzhba oil pipeline again.
Something's burning in the center.
Muscovites' walls are shaking.
There it is, the column of smoke. That's precisely what caused all the walls throughout our entire house to violently shake and tremble.
They're turning off the lights, but you can't turn off the lights. They're flying towards the heat.
We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan right now.
Friends, boom, bada boom. Russians' walls were shaking. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was attacked. Strategic bombers that attack Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FRBs, Kabis, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh-555 and Kh-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 were damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, sea vessels, and a helicopter were hit. 13 Russian radar stations were hit. And in Russia, they claim that the armed forces of Ukraine attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Glad to be here. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one ill, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning an Il-76 arrived at the base, most likely delivering a new batch of Kh-101 missiles. And in Engels there were 3 Tu-95 miss and 2 Tu-160s. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is to what extent? Why? Because there was a large-scale attack, and the attack was carried out by drones, most likely also by a missile. There was a big bang. Since there was this big bang, the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles, not ruling out even the possibility of using a long-range Neptune in that direction. Naturally, there was a detonation after the strike, and the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition, the kind that's loaded into aircraft, among other things. Of course, the planes parked nearby were damaged. It would have been impossible for them not to be. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think that in a few days, our intelligence, our general staff, will confirm it after analyzing satellite images and decoding them. That is, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll have another reason to celebrate. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm it clearly together.
Roman Grigorievich, so what could have been hit? So the bombers themselves, the cruise missile storage, and the aviation fuel depot. So these were the targets of the armed forces of Ukraine, our missiles, and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, to put it simply, very much like a large, sprawling city. In addition to the primary airfield itself, a truly huge number of essential infrastructure facilities of various types and functions are intricately involved in its daily operation. This extensive range of facilities extends from massive underground fuel storage tanks, capable of holding many tens of thousands of tons of vital aviation kerosene, to various crucial depots, including, most importantly, the highly specialized engineering service responsible for meticulous missile preparation, and of course, dedicated storage areas for the powerful aviation bombs and sophisticated missiles specifically used by these formidable strategic bombers. By the way, not many people talk about this, but several dozen kilometers south of Engels, along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility known as Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site, or more precisely, a storage facility for nuclear warheads intended for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles there belonging to the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically tactical nuclear weapons. Just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud would not be like the one over Engels. it would be a massive one reaching all the way to Kazakhstan. The Kazakhs would have seen it already. It's just a shame. There are too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I feel bad disappointing them like this, but still. So this is a really serious facility, and you can't just take it out with rockets and drones. To flatten it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers, carpet bombing the place. But if you blow up this underground fuel storage, let me repeat, it holds tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 here takes on board the equivalent of 3 railway tank cars of this kerosene. They fill more than 150 tons of aviation kerosene there, and the Tu-95 takes 1 tank car, which is also quite a lot. So there are definitely worthwhile targets to hit there. If a strike were to be delivered against all these facilities, it could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our 2 aircraft, Tu-160s, Tu-95s, Tu-22s, and our Kh-55s. Hundreds of missiles were handed over there by Kuchma back then. It was Kuchma who was in charge of that at least. And now, essentially, we're going to try to destroy the very same strategic bombers that we once handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, that will become clear within a few days, once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Grigorievich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases, at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved varies. But there should definitely be at least a regiment there. About 1,500 Russian personnel should be involved in this operation. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Grigorievich?
Absolutely, 100%. The thing is, even the SIS, that's the engineering and technical service, a special engineering service. Of course, there's security, defense of the facility itself, and storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches after all. There are even certain mechanisms for climate control, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen of them were definitely and utterly knocked out, and the remaining hundreds of them were certainly and completely emptied out by this powerful and devastating strike. Believe me, the shockwave there was incredibly serious and truly impactful.
Roman Grigorievich, right now the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a full day after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile as well as the strikes on oil refineries and depots. Regarding the Kavkazskaya station, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Malyuk and Budanov's sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, the Security Service of Ukraine and Special Operations Forces were naturally involved. So at the very least, and probably also the Navy, if Neptune was used there, the coastal missile system and the launch platform were at least involved. But I think within a day it will become clear. Long Neptune Long is the same story. That is, it is launched from the coastal missile system. Naturally, Nijpapa is involved in this. The main targets for this type of missile are objects that need to be exposed. For example, after all, a 150-kilogram warhead is not the same as the 20 kilograms on a drone or 50 or however much they carry. A 150-kilogram warhead can reach and detonate, as we are seeing now, presumably, let's say for now, presumably a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Naturally, the same warhead could be used against TUAPs, or to breach the detonation system, or even at pumping stations. This is one of our main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these people who are not part of our government are running around with the idea of how to secure Russia's hydrocarbon infrastructure. So, God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If Budanov's sanctions hadn't been stopped in May last year, there wouldn't be any this year because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything out over the past year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's our basic Neptune long missile, or Neptune, which is essentially a base missile, the Kh-35. At one time, it was also produced at our facility. Our engines for this missile are turbojet dual circuit engines. The missile was originally air-to-ship. That is its main purpose. In other words, it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, equipped with a good engine and additional fuel tanks. Now it can travel more than 500 kilometers, meaning it reached at least as far as TUAPs, which is 500 kilometers away. I think it could have also struck Engels because they managed to breach a warehouse that was sealed. These missiles aren't just lying around outside. In other words, it's a closed facility. If it was breached, it most likely means a missile got in, but there is no confirmation yet. For now, we won't confirm it either. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Grigorievich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we establish that now.
Well, the missile's range, at least the confirmed one, is definitely 500 to 600 kilometers. We saw this with TUAPs and maybe now with Engels as well. There it's a little over 600 kilometers. That's the actual stated range. So what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? It's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to TUAPs. If you draw that circle, that's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. And the stated range is 1,000 kilometers. You could put a compass in St. Petersburg, for example, and draw a semicircle that almost reaches the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would go beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, the missile would reach the North Caucasus if the stated range matches the actual flight range. Technically, this is possible. Basically, the engine is very good. Our engine, which we manufacture, will definitely run for an hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. So running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. In other words, however many extra buckets of fuel you precisely put into the missile, that is truly how far it will ultimately fly, covering a significant distance indeed.
So Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure targets could be attacked?
Well, definitely they are already under serious targeting. And in order for us to fully carry out our tasks of securing our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to be able to reach the Urals. So it's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But cruise missiles, there's hardly any point, for example, in making cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, which are a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. So for this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, meaning ballistic missiles, I think we'll resolve this issue, if not this year, then next year.
Roman Grigorievich, more good news. The main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea, striking air defense system positions. Ships and a helicopter were hit in the attacks. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125 NEO BSV Nebo SV and the BRLS MICE. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time and it has now been documented.
Well, this definitely took several months. This is the work of the GUR's Magura drones. The main intelligence directorate and the security service have their own drones. They practically turned unmanned boats into aircraft carriers, both of them. Both the Magura from the GUR and the Sea Baby from the SBU. They can now operate almost like aircraft carriers, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they can also carry unmanned surface and underwater vehicles, essentially serving as both a mothership and a relay station at the same time. So a boat that's several meters long and a certain width can, for example, take unmanned aerial vehicles on board, approach the coast of Crimea or somewhere else, somewhere on Russian territory, closer to Novorossiysk, and just a few kilometers from the shore, launch drones under direct control, using the boat itself as a relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just like they do directly with, for example, those same FPV drones. So a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target, depending on its capabilities. Plus, especially the GUR's BEX, Maguras, can also carry sea-to-air missiles. For example, based on the launch platform, it's an R-73 air-to-air missile. An excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands have been produced, and we have thousands of them. It has a thermal homing head, and if you lock onto a target and the missile acquires it, it will chase the target down. And if there are two missiles, Maguras have two missiles, then they can also destroy aerial targets. Here's confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed, and that's for sure, and not just one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR guys have practically become naval aviators, I would say. That is, GUR has entered a field that isn't typical for them, and they performed quite well there. And the security service under Malyuk, that is GUR under Budanov's command, and the SBU under Malyuk's command, are now using practically the entire range of strike capabilities. And what's more, they produce them on their own bases, which is very important. These are intelligence agencies operating on their own bases at their own expense. They still have rather small budgets. They're not the armed forces of Ukraine. They don't have Umarov's billions or hundreds of billions, but nevertheless, they managed it on their own. They found sponsors most likely, and perhaps accomplished this kind of task. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to say.
Roman Grigorievich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian war correspondents, I'd like you to give us a brief overview of the Ukrainian missile system Hrom-2. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, to understand the process, what is Hrom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander in terms of range, warhead, and control system. We have an Iskander of our own like this. Several decades ago, a truly remarkable and exceptionally promising project known as Sapsan was successfully launched and initiated. Based on this Sapsan, a solid fuel ballistic missile system was developed for the Hroms, and naturally this project produced results. So work on this Hrom-1 and Hrom-2 project is ongoing. We achieved a range of 300 kilometers, developed it and sold it to the Saudis, by the way, with Saudi funding, including selling it along with the technical documentation. However, most likely the intervention of our partners allowed us to get at least the technical documentation back, and maybe some of the launchers, and possibly, even though I can't say for sure, some of the missiles as well. So that's what a Hrom-2 is. It's basically the same as the Iskander. 500 kilometers, that's the distance from Moscow to Tuapse. That's what those 500 kilometers mean. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, Rubliovka's escorts would be better off getting as far away as possible from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because, well, the first thunder, the very first strike really ought to bury Lenin. Because honestly, how much longer does he need to lie there after all? The Kremlin is the first target, and the second is Rubliovka. Or maybe the other way around, depending on preference, maybe Rubliovka will be the first to go.
Roman Grigorievich, now, of course, this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents. Because in Russia, they are claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
Well, to understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you don't count the curves, so to speak, but just the straight border between Belarus and Oskol, that's between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, that's the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, that's the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. So our main task is to turn this borderline into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. We need to change the architecture of the front to open up the northern front. It's already open after we started moving towards the Kursk direction, what some extremely frightened idiots call the Moscow direction, as part of our main task of tying down enemy forces. Several tens of thousands of Russian soldiers were pinned down there, and of course the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, you can call it different things, security zones if it's a front line and a mine strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone, about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory. And the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So this kind of buffer zone can be created by advancing not even 30 kilometers, but just 3, 5, or 7 kilometers into Russian territory and mining not our land, but Russian territory. If you lay down several 100,000 of these mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even want to at all. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers, extending the creation of such a buffer zone up to 30 kilometers. In the Kursk direction, we did it, we accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was practically catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and redeploy to defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep without an operational breakthrough. A tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best, most advantageous defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation there. It's the so-called central Russian upland. The difference in height is about 50 to 70 meters between, just for understanding, between the hills, right? So the rivers, or rather the little streams that are there, you could practically spit across them. They're at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230. So these elevation differences It's best to take control of the high ground, no matter where they are, on our side or the Russian side. If there's an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a task is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating such a buffer zone. And the second issue is to try to intercept the Russian reserves that will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw along the borderline and will be redeployed to the Eastern Front so that they don't end up on the Pokrovska direction. They have about 2 divisions there, which is practically 30,000 Russian Federation troops who could now be redeployed from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front. They will be passing right through, or rather along the Belgorod region. And so in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is now being created in the Belgorod area. At least for now, there is positive momentum. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters even if we knew them. It's simply not allowed to broadcast tactical information on air. But in reality, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians have claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake. And here's what Andriy Demchenko says. The Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. The new Ukrainian armed forces are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was some good footage of F-16s being used over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian FSO acted differently. They actually responded correctly from a logical standpoint. Our own CPD and SIPSO people should take a page from their book as well. After all, FSB and KGB officers have been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. And the FSO had to respond to this because the appearance of F-16s practically at the line of contact really rattled the Russians. Combat missions were being carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely for bomb drops of certain munitions below the radar horizon of Russian air defenses, so naturally no one could reach them. And this really shook the Russians in that direction. And naturally, they needed to drown out disinformation. They came up with another piece of disinformation, claiming they shot down an F-16 in that direction. Believe me, no one shot anything down. Well, I have friends, a good number of friends, who would have shared the information if anything had actually happened. I can say with confidence, no one shot anything down. The guys are operating along the entire line of contact in F-16s and Mirages. They've already started carrying out combat missions, operating in those directions where it's possible, based on the density of enemy air defenses and our own ability to cover these aircraft. God's due. So first fill in the blanks yourselves so I don't have to swear too much. So this so-called God's due in Trump's eyes, which was orchestrated by Putin. And for what purpose? Well, to create a certain pressure on the Ukrainian side. It's the same thing, the same ipso, an information psychological special operation in which the heads of state are participating. This is a serious operation. For what purpose? To give the Russian, mainly the Russian population, and of course Trump regarding Ukraine, a chance to try to suppress, to paint some alternative picture of the real events happening on the Kursk land. We are holding the Kursk land. No one is encircled there. We are holding it. And the retreat, yes, there was a retreat indeed, a belated flight. If a month and a half ago, as we said, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled retreat to defensive lines. This was a flight, but still to defensive lines located on Russian territory. The difference is this. The Sudza River in Kursk, well, in the Kursk region, there's the Perepluika River, but its elevation above sea level is 140 meters. Nearby, further south, the elevation is already about 220 meters. So here, there's at least a 50 to 70 meter difference in elevation. And this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units have taken up positions after withdrawing from the Sudza direction. And at this point, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to make it look like they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. The boss is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything's lost, and so on and so forth. They're trying to cut us off, but they're nowhere near surrounding us. It's just unrealistic because along the borderline, there's this ridge. And of course, our troops are present on Kursk land. I don't think we're going to leave from there. It's a good defensive line there. And as for the Russians who are now trying to cut off our direction, they've gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, meaning it's Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers from the borderline, nothing more. They're trying to somehow break through and cut off the supply to this group. And in the information space to somehow ramp up the pressure. Well, Putin threw out some sweet talk, let's put it mildly, aimed at Trump, and now Trump is just mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their voice heard there, it definitely won't end well for anyone. Most likely, strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into this, and now he has nowhere to go. Well, Witkoff got involved. After all, he's such a great Israeli-American, or American-Israeli for us. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds will keep burning, maybe not as intensely as before, and it will be presented a bit differently. Not as sanctions from, say, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, but as the work of local underground groups of various levels. I think that this kind of work by our informants, by the way, could be just as effective as the current efforts of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. And as for the several million people from Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, you simply won't be able to turn them around.
Dear audience, please like this video. Leave a few kind words in the comments to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.